While the Super Nintendo Entertainment System was not known for its strong library of shooters, especially in the US, there are still some gems to be found. I've covered some of the great ones in previous videos, including 5 great 16-bit shmups and 5 more great 16-bit shmups, but today we're going to look at some that didn't quite live up to greatness. Now, these are worthy of your time for sure, but don't necessarily represent the best games the genre has to offer. So, with that, I present 5 good Super Nintendo Shmups. What better place to start than 1992's Phalanx? As you probably know, the North American box art features a guy playing a banjo. While somewhat random, I do find it pretty rad. However, the game itself is more of the average variety. After a nifty cutscene showing off some mandatory Mode 7, we are dropped into the game. You start off pretty weak, but in no time at all, you'll notice some enemies drop power-ups, a pair of options, and a secondary missile. If I'm honest, the weapons in Phalanx aren't the most exciting in the world. Actually, nothing in the game is really all that exciting. Enemies tend to be of the generic variety, the game has a grungy look to it, and incoming bullets are far too small, far too dark, and they don't stand out nearly enough. On the flip side, Phalanx does have some positives. First, the frame rate is rather smooth, there is plenty of parallax scrolling, some transparency effects, the soundtrack is above average, and the enemy patterns are varied, forcing you to change up your strategies with each passing level. I also like how each level has a mid-boss, preventing things from feeling stale. Above all else, Phalanx just plays well. You can change your speed on the fly, the controls are smooth, and the auto-fire is a welcome addition. Don't expect this one to blow you away, but it's still a fun little diversion. Next up is Imperium, also released stateside in 1992. This one starts off strong with some awesome anime-styled cutscenes, showing off giant mechs with light reflecting off their metallic bodies. Pretty sweet. When the game starts, you definitely get the feeling the developers were inspired by the excellent Musha for the Sega Genesis. You're flying high in the air above the clouds, everything on the ground looks tiny, and the soundtrack is rocking with plenty of guitar riffs. But other than some superficial coincidences, Imperium is a whole different beast. Basically, you have 4 weapons identified at the top of the screen. Also at the top of the screen is an EXP meter telling you how much XP is needed before an item levels up. As far as I can tell, which weapon levels up appears random, which is a shame. Anyway, the weapons are typical of the time, with a wide beam, focus laser, regular shot, and some stars that fire in the opposite direction you move. Lastly, there are screen-clearing bombs. Imperium is also hard as hell, and easily the most difficult game on this list. Get ready for repeat playthroughs, because after taking 5 hits, it's game over with limited continues. You really have to learn each and every enemy pattern because everything moves rather quickly. Imperium certainly won't blow you away, but the solid mechanics, smooth frame rate, pleasant soundtrack, and tough challenge all add up to a decent shooting experience. Moving up the shooting chain is Aero Fighters, arriving on the Super Nintendo in 1993. Unlike the previous titles, you actually have a choice between 4 characters, each sporting a jet with varying speed, spread, and power. I love stuff like this, as it gives you an incentive to replay through the game multiple times. I also love the sound. The soundtrack itself is generic for sure, but the sound effects are pretty great. The weapon sounds are subdued rather than harsh, and everything explodes with a satisfying boom. The graphics too are rather nice. While the backgrounds are a bit generic, everything else looks fairly detailed, from the different bosses, various enemies, and nice chunky bullets. Aero Fighters does a nice job showing the SNES could in fact pull off fast-paced arcade shmups when resources are allocated wisely. Finally, the controls are smooth, your weapon can be upgraded 4 times, and you have a limited amount of screen-clearing bombs. Enemy patterns are also satisfying, with plenty of bright-colored bullets to dodge and enemies to shoot down. Honestly, Aero Fighters does everything well. Unfortunately, it never really goes beyond that. Aero Fighters is exceptionally competent in my opinion, but never does anything to really elevate itself past good. Your $500 is definitely better spent elsewhere. Darius Twin was a launch title for the Super Nintendo back in 1991 and contains the it factor so lacking in Aero Fighters. The it factor, of course, is the fantastic aquatic themes. Nearly all of the enemies in Darius Twin are based on some oceanic creature, and there is something incredibly charming about the overall art direction. The gameplay, however, is a bit more basic. As you venture through the levels, which feature branching paths, you'll slowly upgrade your main weapon, which fires forward, and your secondary weapon, which fires in 4 different directions. This changes up the gameplay a bit, as it is often more strategic to hang out in the middle of the screen, rather than the back. It's not much, but it's stuff like this that make a shmup stand out. For being a 1991 release, Darius Twin looks impressive. There are multiple layers of parallax scrolling, and while the game does occasionally slow down, it does remain at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second a majority of the time. However, the soundtrack is a bit all over the place. The boss theme is excellent and really pumps you up for taking down massive fish, but other times it can be really odd with some questionable melodies. At least it's unique, like the rest of the game. The only real fault is the lack of difficulty. As you shoot in 5 different directions, it's fairly easy to mow down enemies without having to get too evasive with your maneuvers. Until you get to the final level, which is really hard. Still, at the end of the day, Darius Twin is easy to recommend. Last but certainly not least is Earth Defense Force, or Super EDF, arriving in 1992. For some reason, no one ever talks about this game, but it's a surprisingly strong title. The main gimmick here is the ability to select one of 8 different weapons before each stage. Though, as I suck at shumps, I always select the homing weapon. Anyway, the opening stage is rather fantastic, with plenty of parallax, transparent clouds, and a background which slowly fades as the level progresses. All of this while zipping along at 60 frames per second. Imagine that. Of course, there is slowdown, but this can often be helpful, especially during boss battles. About the only thing holding the game back is the gameplay. You are stuck with your chosen weapon for the entire level, which is kind of a bummer. The leveling up system is also kind of silly. When the bar at the top of the screen fills up, you level up. Of course, you always level up right before the end boss, making the entire system a bit pointless. Still, Super EDF is way above average. Enemy patterns are fun, the bosses are nice and big, the music has a nice, clean, high-energy sound, and the game's difficulty curve ramps up nicely with each passing stage. Honestly, Super EDF is pretty damn good and a real hidden gem on the Super Nintendo. So there you have it, 5 good shmups for the Super Nintendo. Now, this is not a definitive list, and definitely not intended to be a best of. And the SNES has better shooters, so be sure to leave a comment and let me know which SNES shmups you enjoy.